Hello and welcome to Pieces of 8. We're back with our 4th episode and excited to share what's going on around the region. I'm your host, Kenesha Allen. In this episode, we cover cutting-edge restoration and science work to a partnership with the church. But first, here to join me is Curt Mccaslin, the new supervisor of Refuges. Hi, Curt. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's just jump right in. Tell us about your road to Region 8.
Well, I left Region 8 in 2001 and started working at Cabeza Prieta. It's a large wildlife refuge on the Arizona border. And I worked there for about 10 years. I did not anticipate actually working there 10 years, but I really enjoyed the complexity of issues that were there, as well as just having so much recreation and open space in my backyard. But after about 10 years, I grew weary of it being hot and dry and wanted to go somewhere greener that had water. And was fortunate enough to be offered the job at Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge. And although it was greener, it didn't necessarily have a lot of water. And within 5 months, we were dealing with a wildfire that lasted about a year. But in both of those areas, I really enjoyed the opportunities to work with partners and dealing with complex issues that were quite honestly larger than the refuges that we managed. The opportunities to come back to Region 8 and continue on with that was something that was very exciting for me.
Okay, well, we're certainly glad to have you back.
Thank you.
We're going to learn a little bit more about you later. But first, Cindy Sandoval takes us to Sonoma County, where restoration work is in progress to restore native coho salmon habitat.
The National Fish Habitat Partnership has announced the 10 Waters to Watch for 2013, and this year's list includes California's Grape Creek, a tributary of the Russian River. The Russian River once hosted thousands of spawning salmon, yet between 2000 and 2009, it was estimated that less than 100 adult coho returned to the Russian River watershed, and landowners are working to bring them back.
As a grower, I believe that we can do the agricultural processes and not disrupt the fish and not disrupt the spawning habitat. The land wouldn't be as fertile or as agriculturally productive as it is if these fish hadn't been coming from the ocean, dying here, providing food for other animals, bringing the minerals back from the ocean. If the fish hadn't done that, I don't think that it would be such a wonderful place to grow things.
The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, along with its partners, funded innovative anti-frost projects that reduce grape growers' dependency on the creek water during spring frosts. Growers misted vines to protect grapes by forming a protective ice jacket to insulate their crops. By eliminating the misting practice, more water is available for endangered Central Coast coho.
To provide frost protection all throughout Grape Creek, we really went with two approaches. In the lower system, fans were installed in the vineyards themselves that help to bring the warm air that's aloft just above the vineyards and blow it down onto the vineyard itself, and therefore push out the cold air that would be freezing the vines. And then in the upper watershed, we were able to employ an off-channel pond because that area wasn't really conducive to these fans because it's not big and flat and open. Water is actually brought to that pond from an off-site well that's not connected to the stream and therefore doesn't impact stream flow. It's stored off-site, and that way the vineyard operator can use it in the summer if he needs to irrigate with it, and in the winter for frost protection.
The Grape Creek project is unique from many other projects because the obstacle for fish was not one large dam, but water being diverted by multiple users who rely on the creek for many different reasons. The service and its partners will continue to find alternative and innovative ways to balance agriculture and endangered species.
Thanks, Cindy. Now, Curt, you've worked at several different refuges. Mm-hmm. What's unique about Region 8's refuges?
Well, not only the refuges within the region, but the region in general. Both professionally and personally, the mountains, the desert, the rivers and the coast are things that I've always enjoyed. When I lived here before, certainly being that close to all of those different types of habitats were just something that I enjoyed tremendously. But not only that, within the refuges within the region is that diversity of habitats that exist within the refuge. When I had the opportunity to work at Kern National Wildlife Refuge in my undergraduate, when I was getting my undergraduate degree, I really enjoyed the fact that we would be working within the wetland ecosystem, but immediately adjacent were almost desert-like habitats of the southern San Joaquin Valley.
Okay. Well, Region 8 is certainly unique in its own right.
Yes.
Okay, so moving forward, Matt Bond tells us about the services partnership with the church.
We pray for all those who will use this trail for recreation and refreshment.
The St. Barnabas Episcopal Church in Mount Shasta, California, held a special Sunday service recently to dedicate and bless a meadow that was recently restored on the church grounds. The meadow provides benefits for wildlife and improves water quality. The project was undertaken by the St. Barnabas Church, members of the congregation, volunteers from the local community, as well as the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Tom Hasseldens, a restoration consultant from Mount Shasta, worked on the restoration project.
With the type of wet meadows in the Mount Shasta area, there's two basic things that mess them up. One of them is drainage ditches, and the other one is the lack of fire, which is much more subtle. But there are some cases where they haven't been drained, but they still get encroached by ponderosa pine because of the lack of fire. And then as those trees encroach, they shade out the meadow vegetation and they do suck up more water. So this meadow had both going on. So we filled the ditch and we took out most of the invading pine trees.
2 years in the making, and with a lot of help, the meadow has been completely restored. Reverend Larry Holman is the priest in charge at St. Barnabas, and he presided over the Sunday service.
A number of our parishioners participated in various aspects of the work itself, laying straw during the winter to protect the new seed, doing teasel pulls, helping with cleanup. So there's been active involvement by parishioners throughout the process.
The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service provided 2 grants to St. Barnabas through its Partners for Fish and Wildlife program, and also provided technical input and helped with the necessary permits. Sherry Hagwood of the Yreka Fish and Wildlife Office was the lead biologist on the project.
I think this wetland is important for a couple of reasons. One is it's a wonderful public relations. It's a great place that anybody in the public can come to and enjoy nature. And that's kind of unique in the Partners program.
The St. Barnabas Meadow Restoration Project and Community Trail is a unique example of a Partners project with a private landowner that brings the community together for the benefit of wildlife and for the enjoyment of all.
Great story. Thanks, Matt. Now, Curt, tell us about your vision for Region 8's refuges moving forward.
Well, working on the wildlife refuges that I have in the past, 2 have been very large. And one of the things that, even though they were very unique in that one was in the desert and one was in the southeast United States, was that the refuges were part of a larger landscape. And even though they were extremely large, they could not be managed as an island unto themselves. And the opportunity to look at how we contribute to the to landscape conservation, but also looking at how we work with our partners to maximize conservation across the landscape, something that I'm very interested in.
Okay, well, we look forward to that happening. Now, for our last story, Naomi Nishihara tells us about the service's efforts to help 2 imperiled fish species.
Lost River suckers of Oregon's Upper Klamath Basin and Delta smelt in the Sacramento-San Joaquin River Delta have been at the heart of water use debates for over a decade. Lost River suckers are endangered and the Delta smelt are threatened. In studying these fish, researchers believe that poor water quality in the basin and the delta is preventing their recoveries by killing off fish in their earliest and most vulnerable life stage. To learn more, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service biologist Scott Foote and his staff at the California-Nevada Fish Health Center in Anderson, California, are raising juvenile smelt and suckers and conducting experiments that mimic the water conditions of their natural habitats.
Our focus, though, was to look at when they first hatch out, they have about 6 to 7 days where they're absorbing their yolk, and then they have to go out and find food, and they have to be able to capture small invertebrates. And if they are poisoned by pesticides, that can have that a toxic effect where they just can't find that food. And there's really no other way to get at this question. So we had an opportunity working with our group up in Livingston Stone National Fish Hatchery. They keep a population up there as a refugia population. They will supply us with eggs. They hatch out in our Delta water supply. And then after 6 days, we go and feed them these invertebrates, and we see not only how many survive in the Delta water, but how well they do on feeding.
The Delta smelt are small fish that only spawn in fresh water, and in the Delta, water conditions are such that their young have not been surviving. A similar situation exists for the suckers as dams and water diversion for irrigation have changed water quality in their habitat.
With our Delta Smelt larval biomarker program, what we do is we get our eggs from this hatchery. They hatch in our different water supplies, a control water which has no pesticides, and water from the Delta from 2 locations. Our little larvae, which are no bigger than a pencil lead, and they're only probably about this big, are placed in little replicate containers. They then go into these water samples. They live for 6 days. They absorb their yolk, and then on the 6th day we feed them these rotifers. We allow them to feed for an hour, and then we take them out and we count how many have survived and how many have fed.
By gathering information about the survival rates of the young fish, Foote hopes to further solidify evidence that adverse water is causing premature deaths. His team has also reared young suckers from Klamath Basin in his lab, and their populations are experiencing a similar generational die-off. Through tissue samples, scientists have been able to identify liver damage likely caused by low oxygen levels and toxins from blue-green algae.
In the upper Klamath Basin, people have been working up there for several decades on enumerating fish, also looking at survival rates of adults and things like that. But a whole separate group is those that study the water quality up there. It's really kind of trying to get the two to merge and look at it from a perspective of the fish. You know, the fish is living in this very hostile, changing environment. These suckers, we've worked with them now for about 10 years. We know they're very hardy fish, yet they're dying. So we now have to kind of draw the areas that are dangerous to them, and that by identifying what water quality can change, we may be able to help them. We're also learning how to grow them. And we may get in a position where, because their numbers are going down, that we may actually have to do what's called a supplementation program, where we rear them in a small hatchery situation and release them.
Suckers can live for up to 40 years, but the dominant generation today is already 22, and no new generations have appeared. As Foote gathers information about Delta and Klamath water, the smelt and suckers' days are numbered. Without offspring survival, the smelt are dying, and the suckers are slowly aging without a generation to take their place.
Thanks, Naomi, and thank you, Curt, for joining us.
Thanks.
And thank you all for watching, and until next time, keep conserving.